Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Look, as an executive, your time is arguably the most valuable asset your organization has, right? Yet, think about how much of that time you spend just staring at dense, confusing reports, trying to decode what exactly it is you're supposed to be looking at. Well, today we're taking a consultant's approach to this. We're going to look at how to engineer absolute clarity from raw data, all to accelerate your decision-making. We're going to completely change how you think about charts, graphs, and dashboards. It's a scenario that literally plays out in boardrooms every single day. Someone brings up this massive presentation deck. It's totally packed with data, and instead of a swift, confident decision, everything just grinds to a halt. So why does this happen? Why do complex dashboards stall executive decisions? Well, the reality is executives are wasting precious time hunting for the so what in cluttered reports. When your data isn't structured as a clear narrative, your brain has to work overtime just to process the visual information. And that leaves you with practically zero energy to analyze the actual business implications. To fix this, we've got a high-level playbook to transform that raw data into actionable narratives. Number 1, direct focus with visual affordances. 2, accessibility erases cognitive load. 3, aesthetics build visual trust. And 4, driving adoption and change. Let's get right into it. Section 1, direct focus with visual affordances. Stop hunting for the takeaway. To really get this, we need to borrow a concept from the product design world called affordances. Think about a door that just has a flat push plate on it. That plate affords pushing. A handle affords pulling. Affordances are these strategic design aspects inherent to an object that make it completely obvious how it's meant to be used. And here's the thing for data communication. Affordances aren't just, artistic choices. They're strategic tools to instantly direct a decision-maker's brain exactly where it needs to go. Now, this is a brilliant illustration of the concept in the physical world. Look at the design of OXO kitchen gadgets. Their whole philosophy is universal design. These tools are built so that there's really only one way to pick them up, the correct way. Good design literally forces correct usage without the user even noticing it happening. And when we communicate with data, we want our visuals to function exactly like these gadgets. We want the correct interpretation to be totally intuitive and unavoidable. So how do we translate that physical design into data presentation? It boils down to 3 core rules. First, highlight the important stuff. But you have to be ruthless here. Experts actually recommend highlighting at most 10% of the visual design. Otherwise, you just dilute the effect. Second, eliminate distractions. If an element isn't adding necessary context, just cut it. Boom, gone. And third, create a clear visual hierarchy. You need to tell your audience exactly what order they should process the information. Let's see what happens when we completely ignore these rules. Check out this original Pew Research bar chart. It's a classic example of a common dashboard mistake. The underlying story here is that new marriage rates are driven primarily by an increase among people with a bachelor's degree or more. But looking at this, your eyes are darting everywhere. That crucial trend is completely buried under all these evenly weighted, super distracting categories. Your brain has to jump back and forth between the legend and the bars just to figure out what is even going on. Now watch how this transforms into something so much more powerful. On the left, we've got that cluttered original. On the right, the streamlined makeover. If I'm advising your team as a consultant, here's exactly why I'd say this switch is so effective. By simply changing from a bar graph to a line graph, we instantly make it easier to see the trends over time. We got rid of that redundant all category. We removed the decimal points. Nobody needs to think about fractions of a person here. And crucially, we highlighted only the bachelor's degree or more line in bold orange. The narrative is instant now. And notice how visual hierarchy can completely transform a scatter plot. Imagine you're evaluating car models based on customer satisfaction and the frequency of issues. By using super categories, these quadrants here, and adding a really intentional pop of bold red in the bottom right, it immediately flags the problem area for you as an executive. It screams high satisfaction, many issues. You don't have to study the axes to figure out where things are going wrong. The design itself affords immediate understanding of the problem. All right, moving on to section 2. Accessibility erases cognitive load. Don't overcomplicate the data. I absolutely love anchoring this philosophy with a quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He said, "You know you've achieved perfection not when you have nothing more to add, but when you have nothing to take away." When we clean up a chart, we aren't just tidying things up. We're executing a timeless strategy for effective communication. The decision of what to cut is honestly often more important than what you choose to include. Because the crucial point here is this: if it's hard to read, it's hard to do. There's this fascinating research by Song and Schwartz at the University of Michigan. They found that when instructions were given in a fussy, hard-to-read font, students actually judged the task itself as more difficult and were less likely to even do it. The translation for business is huge. If your chart looks overly complicated, executives are going to unconsciously perceive the underlying business decision as more difficult. Complexity literally creates hesitation. One of the absolute easiest ways to reduce this cognitive load is to leverage your text strategically. The title bar at the top of any presentation deck, that is the most precious real estate you have. You've got to stop letting your teams use redundant descriptions like 2015 budget. Instead, enforce the use of action titles. If the data shows that spending is above budget, the title should just say exactly that. Estimated 2015 spending is above budget. Tell the audience what they're supposed to know or what they're supposed to do right up front. The difference this makes is night and day. On the left, we have a nice, clean graph showing tickets received versus processed. Sure, it's a pretty picture, but it demands that the executive figure out the so what on their own. Now look at the right. We've transformed it. We added an action title that says, "Please approve the hire of 2 FTEs." We added annotations explaining exactly when employees quit and why the backlog started in the first place. By just adding targeted text, we turned basic data into an immediate, actionable business case. Okay, Section 3. Aesthetics build visual trust, making the data approachable. Take a look at this former bottle design for Method liquid dishwashing soap. It was visually stunning. I mean, so much so that people treated it like art and just left it out on their counters. But here's the really fascinating part. The bottle actually had leakage issues. Yet, people were totally willing to overlook the inconvenience of a leaking bottle because they just loved the aesthetics so much. Beautiful design actually makes your audience more tolerant of minor issues and way more open to your overall message. So when you apply aesthetics to data visualization, what you're really doing is showing respect for the executive's time. The rules here are pretty simple. First, use color intentionally. Never, ever rely on those default rainbow palettes. Second, pay attention to strict alignment to create a sense of unity across the board. And third, leverage white space to prevent clutter. Please don't just stretch a graphic to fill up an entire screen. Comparing these customer segment charts side by side really reveals the power of aesthetics. The one on the left just feels disorganized, right? The colors are everywhere, elements aren't aligned, and that white space is trapped so awkwardly between the labels and the data, it looks sloppy, and that subconsciously makes you question the data itself. But the chart on the right, it applies our aesthetic rules. It uses an intentional blue to highlight a specific 30% and 50% segment. Everything is strictly aligned. It leverages white space properly. It doesn't just look better, it looks highly trustworthy. Let's wrap up with Section 4, Driving Adoption and Change. Overcoming resistance. As a consultant, I've got to be honest with you about this reality. Stakeholders are going to push back. They will resist. And it's not because the new designs are worse, but simply because human nature creates this totally natural resistance to the new. Your team is comfortable with the old, cluttered, confusing ways they've always seen data, just because it's familiar to them. So, to actually gain acceptance, you need actionable strategies. First, clearly articulate the direct benefits of the new approach. Transparency really helps here. Second, show them the side-by-side comparisons, just like we did today, so the superiority is completely undeniable. Third, don't just dictate from the top down. Provide multiple options for input to give them a sense of ownership. And finally, secure your vocal stakeholders early. Get those influential leaders on board in one-on-one meetings before you ever present the new dashboard to the whole room. So I'll leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Simplifying your visuals isn't just some exercise in making things look pretty. It's about removing the friction between information and action. It is about making the business decision completely obvious. So I invite you to take a hard look at your own dashboards tomorrow morning. Ask yourself, what critical story is your data currently hiding behind the clutter?